And welcome back to another episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. I am yelling. I'm PJ Clark. He is Michael Nania. Ben Blessington
What just happened?
is out in California enjoying
He hasn't
his
even
football
woken up
team.
yet. Wait
No,
until he wakes up.
I don't think he even knows what happened. Robert Saleh fired out as the head coach of the New York Jets following another depressing, demoralizing loss to the Minnesota Vikings. I don't, Michael. How are you? I don't really know at this point.
I mean, look, let's be real. I was just saying this to you before we started. I was losing not interest because, look, I have to show up and write some articles, do some stuff to an extent with this team, but neither of us wanted to do a podcast after that game. Call us whatever you want. It was getting hard to be invested in this product with the redundancy of the struggles that they were having, just the way that the same problems year over year were repeating, regardless of the cast of characters. But this news comes out and I am invigorated. I am rejuvenated. I am ready to get back into this and see where this thing goes. Maybe a week from now, it's the same exact show. But right now, I feel a new jolt of energy, and I feel like the franchise and the team likely does as well. That was much needed. So I'm pleasantly shocked is how I would describe it right now.
I kind of just want to know what happened within the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
Because clearly something did. I find it weird that he would, be allowed to have a press conference yesterday,
Right.
like everything was normal, and then show up on Tuesday morning and you're gone. Jeff Ulbrich, interim head coach. I feel like that should come as a surprise to nobody. Nathaniel Hackett, still employed by the Jets, which we can get into at least a little bit here, because I know that there are some people out there that say, what does this change? What does this actually do? And maybe you're not wrong, but what it does change is, first time that Woody has ever taken initiative and done this.
Adam Gase didn't have this happen. Todd Bowles, nobody. Robert Saleh, the first one.
It's pretty crazy. I did not. We all expected, you tweeted this morning that, we were thinking Devontae is a Jet by midday here. We're all expecting some sort of Tuesday news drop. Aaron's going to go on McAfee. There's always something. Devontae Adams cancels his K Adams show appearance. There's always something going on Tuesday, Jets-wise. Did not think it was going to be this.
No.
So I really, outside of your initial reaction, I think everybody's initial reaction to just, holy shit. How are you feeling about this right now?
Well, I mean, like you said, it is interesting to think about what could have led to this, because that was my first thought. Like, he had a press conference yesterday. It was business as usual. The sky is the media thinks the sky is falling. The fans think the sky is falling. We're going to get it right. I believe in this team. Same nonsense that usually I overlook, but I had my series of tweets criticizing them because I was starting to get a little fed up. But you just never expected that. We sat through an 0-13 start of Adam Gase and nothing happened. We sat through Todd Bowles, who, had an equal 4 years as Saleh with more success in the bank given his first season, and he lasted the whole season. So it was never on my radar that this was remotely a possibility, especially, in terms of it happening right now, that it would happen this week, given that he had a press conference already and there was no indication of any looming threat. So, like, you wonder, was there some sort of blow up or something? Because, like, back in March, if we remember, and I wouldn't have remembered this, but NYJ Matt pulled it back up, doing what he does with the old tweets. But back in March, there was that, reported spat that they had, Woody Johnson and Saleh, and Woody had to come out on Twitter and try to, call it nonsense that there was a heated argument between the two of them. Maybe it's not nonsense, and there was some tension between these two guys. But I really did think that the Saleh-Rodgers relationship and the idea that they were fine on the same page, I never really bought into that. I really thought that the one interaction against New England on that Thursday night game, I felt like that summed it all up. On a weekly basis, it just felt like, Saleh had this complacency, this kind of blind optimism that things were going to be corrected, work themselves out. They just needed patience and everything would be okay. But Rodgers always had a different mentality. He's a lot more, he holds people accountable to a much higher degree. He holds himself accountable. He just addresses problems a lot more head on than Saleh was. So I don't think they ever saw eye to eye. So there could be a degree of Woody listening to some input from Rodgers here. I don't know what happened, but looking forward now with Ulbrich as the interim head coach, I'm optimistic because this is a guy who I'm shocked did not get head coach interviews this past offseason. I think will this next offseason, we'll see how this season goes. Maybe he, makes his claim for this role. But, prior to this, I thought he's going to get head coach interviews in the offseason. So I'm very excited to see what he does because he's done an amazing job with his defense. I think he brings you a little bit more fire, higher standards, and toughness compared to what we've seen from Saleh. The game planning acumen and just overall schematic acumen, I think you could trust is better because it really feels like this has been his defense while Saleh has more so ran the whole team. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that could make its way towards the offense. You could see a little more innovation, some improvements and adjustments to the game planning, better in-game ability to adapt in-game. So I think there are a lot of positive things Ulbrich can bring to the table. And I'm very curious to see if he could flip some of the philosophical issues that Saleh was hamstringing this team with. The complacency, like I said, blind optimism that it feels like he had, the stagnancy schematically and in terms of game planning and adjustments, all of that I feel like trickled down from what Saleh was establishing on the team on both sides of the ball. Offensively, the defensive success has been great, but I think that all that offensive stuff trickles down from him as much as it's on Hackett. So I'm very optimistic to see what Ulbrich can do.
I don't know. I think it's like totally surprising. Like it's not. The defense obviously has not played like poorly. I don't know. It's just weird. Like I think it is. I want to say it's a positive that Woody is like showing initiative and like taking matters into his own hands here. I don't know if I want to call it reactionary because, as you said, like it hasn't been good. Like the results have not been positive, but it's a jolt in the arm for sure for everybody in that building. It seems like, reports are coming out that everybody, or at least the defense is surprised by this. I'm sure Aaron Rodgers to some extent is not surprised by this. And I wonder if he still goes on Pat McAfee this afternoon. I'm really just stunned. I do, ask
Same.
the question of, what does this change? What does this actually get you anywhere? Diana Rossini is saying that, what he wanted to make a change before it was too late because he thinks this is a playoff team. I think they have the talent to be a playoff team, as we've discussed on this podcast for weeks now, but the coaching has not gotten there. And I don't know if this changes anything offensively. I hope it does, but Keith Carter is still here. Nathaniel Hackett is still here. Jeff Ulbrich is, as you said, a guy that should have gotten interviews last offseason, would have gotten interviews this offseason. So now he gets an opportunity to put that on tape, for lack of a better term, for the rest of the league. I really do. I don't want to say like this was too short a leash. I don't want to say it was anything like that because you could have told me that, they all were gone after last year and I would have probably felt fine with it. But this is, I don't know, just really, really came out of nowhere. And I am excited to see what comes next, I guess. Yeah.
Excited shock is a good emotion to describe it. I mean, I still can't process it. It was so out of left field, but it's in a pleasant way too, because it was hard to see them going anywhere. And I said this after the previous game against the Vikings. I thought that this team is still on track for the playoffs just because of how, the AFC does not look like what we thought it was going to look like. The NFC is the power conference right now. The Jets are still only a half game out of the playoffs behind a Chargers team that is, that has shown some good things, but didn't have the highest expectations coming into the year. And if they win this week, they're in first place in the division. So it's because of that and the talent that they have, I feel like they were still on track to talent their way into the playoffs, whether that's 9 or 10 wins. But my optimism of them having the chance to win a Super Bowl this season, which is the goal we all had and they had, very explicitly, that optimism had evaporated. I did not think they had a chance of winning the Super Bowl anymore. I was moving my goalposts in to just, let's make the playoffs, let's win some games and have some fun. I'm not going to judge you as a championship contender anymore. But with this move, I think the hope is that you could bring those championship hopes back. And it's too soon to say that right now before they've even taken the field. They need to prove it first. Yeah. It's only one guy who's out the door. You still have Hackett, you still have Carter, you still have a lot of underperforming players. So you have to prove it first. But I think that is the goal in making this move, is to bring the ceiling back up. More ambition, higher standards, just within the game planning, the practice, the preparation, all of that. I think the goal is to see if you could ignite a spark, and with a different perspective in that head coach role, can we raise the ceiling back up? Because, like I said, I think they're still going to make the playoffs. I still feel confident in saying that. But it was hard to see them winning 3 or 4 games in a row to win a championship with that level of, just the general mentality that they had. So let's see if a new perspective in that role can bring back the potential for this team to string wins together and be the championship contender that they were built to be. So that's where my head is at.
I really am just like my brain is completely.
You're just struggling to process it right now. I can tell you don't even know what to make of it. I hardly know what to make of it.
No, I don't know what to make. I don't know. I don't know what the correct answer is. Like, I feel this feels somewhat reactionary to something that I guess that could have happened, that I'm sure will come to light at some point in the last 24 hours, that could have happened or not have happened. I mean, I thought we can get into the Vikings game a little bit now. Like, I thought Quincy Williams's post-game comments were pretty enlightening about.
In hindsight, is something that looks a lot different. I like those comments, and I feel like that's something that more, we needed more from Saleh and we weren't getting. So that is another interesting thing.
That's interesting. You have, not that I care about this at all, but you have Mekhi Becton and LaMichael Pirine tweeting about how much they hated Saleh this morning. Like, I don't know, man. Like, this could just be a total case of lost the locker room. Obviously, you would have to think Aaron Rodgers had a hand in this to some extent. But maybe if you're losing a Quincy Williams or a CJ Mosley, those are guys that can set the tone in a locker room, captains of the team, that maybe the relationship just kind of soured on everybody and they're ready to rally behind Ulbrich. I do have a lot of hesitancy with the offensive staff remaining intact. Like, that is the problem of this team. And this does nothing to change it on the forefront. At least the defense I would still expect to be good. But man, this is just, it's wild that they've had obviously so many horrible coaches, that this has never happened before. And it happens now on a random Tuesday in week 6 when the coach did a Monday press conference, 20 hours ago. It really
have
is.
A Woody Johnson statement that just dropped.
Oh, good.
Via the team's official Twitter account.
Great. Live reaction.
Should we read it?
Yeah. Quote, "This morning I informed Robert Saleh that he will no longer serve as head coach of the Jets. I thanked him for his hard work these past 3.5 years and wished him and his family well moving forward. This is not an easy decision, but we are not where we should be given our expectations. I believe now is the best time for us to move in a different direction. Jeff Ulbrich will serve as interim head coach for the rest of the season. He is a tough coach who has the respect of the coaches and players on his team. I believe he, along with the coaches on this staff, can get the most out of our talented team and attain the goals we established this offseason," end quote.
I like it. I mean, obviously we're never going to hear, at least not anytime soon, the real story of what happened, at least from Woody's perspective. But in terms of what you could say publicly in these, kind of generic statements that you put out through the social media. I mean, I think it's a good way to address it. I think he was head on in talking about how they're underwhelming compared to the expectations. And I think it gives off it kind of aligns with some of the goals that I was discussing earlier with making this move, is how can we raise the ceiling back up? Because, it's only 5 games into the season, and I think it's easy to believe that their talent will put them back into the mix for a wild card or whatever, but that wasn't the goal. So I do feel like this statement, as much as it possibly could, does kind of show us that Woody has similar visions with it. Like, how can we get back to the expectations that we had?
Yeah, that statement, and Connor Hughes is tweeting that, Woody felt like the team was not going to turn it around, and that's why he made the change. And it's hard to disagree with that, just considering the lack of just discipline and motivation and want to that this team has shown under Robert Saleh, the lack of preparation, the consistently slow starts, the undisciplined penalties. And again, like, at the end of the day, that falls on the head coach. We've seen that unravel enough coaches for the Jets. I mean, it was the killer for Todd Bowles. I think this is pretty similar, that, you have a top flight defensive coach that, I don't know if Saleh gets another job as a head coach. I'm sure he's going to get a defensive coordinator job, but you have a top flight defensive coach that can game plan well and scheme up well, but the team, the in-game management, the lack of adjustments, the timeout usage, the motivation, the starting fast, all of that was horrible under Bowles. All of that was horrible under Saleh. And I don't know. Are you expecting a dead cat bounce here with a new coach? Maybe. Like as you said, you're one game out of the playoffs. You beat Buffalo on Monday night, and this is a lot different of a conversation than what we're having right now. But it feels, I don't know. Like, I am really surprised. I didn't think this was ever on the radar, because they've never shown that it could possibly be on the radar. I thought, like, maybe Hackett, but even then you have to go through the Rodgers thing. I don't know what this means for Devontae Adams. I don't know who's running the team anymore. Is Joe Douglas like kind of having a coup here, and they're actually, trading for Adams now, and Saleh didn't want Adams? Like, I don't know what the end goal is here, but it's hard to disagree with Woody's idea that the team was dead in the water with Saleh in charge.
I mean, this Connor Hughes tweet is very interesting. I mean, he says that, quote, "There was some feeling from those I touched base that Nate Hackett's job could be in jeopardy. Higher ups have been on him the last couple of weeks. No one expected Robert Saleh, especially when there was nothing Monday." And prior to that, he says the Jets and their entire coaching staff were in the building on Monday. They started their preliminary preparation for Buffalo, review the Vikings, knowing a win put them first place in the AFC East. So it seemed like it was business as usual, and this just happened out of nowhere on Tuesday. I don't know if something happened within the last 24 hours, or if Woody just said, you know what, I need to make a move, which is obviously very out of character for him. It's something he's never done, and the Jets have had a lot of not so great coaches who did ultimately get fired after seasons. But to do it now it's shocking, and it's still hard to process it. But hopefully it is in a positive way, and I think it will be. It can't go much lower than it has been. When you're the craziest stat that I saw is the fact that the Jets have scored the exact same amount of points through 5 games this year as they did last season. And that's including games, in Dallas when they got blown out and couldn't do anything. The New England game where, again, it was just like these last couple games, low bar to clear, offense couldn't clear it. Jets couldn't improve on that. And it was just a consistency of the same issues that I think was the most frustrating thing for me, I think for most fans. And it seems like Woody kind of had the same feeling of the redundancy of the struggles. It wasn't like, 1 week the Jets are losing 35-30, then it's 10-3. It was just consistently the same thing year after year, no matter who you cycled in and out, coordinator, position coaches, quarterback, nothing mattered. It was the same product for 3 years. And the only constant and all that was Saleh. And I think that's kind of what drove it for Woody is let's see if a change here could save the season while we still have a chance to achieve the high standards that we had going into this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it feels at the end of the day, was he surviving this season? No. So like maybe now is the time to make a change just so you can see if you get anything out of it, right? Like that's the theory behind it. But how you can backtrack and go, if you were so willing to fire a guy after 5 games, in which you're 2-3, you're not even 0-5, then like should he have started the season at all? Right?
Yeah. I remember after last season, I was very much on the fire Saleh, fire Hackett train. And it got to the point where, they made good offseason moves. We had high expectations coming into the year, started 2-1. It got to the point where, in hindsight, I felt like I was overreacting. But now that we're here, like, as you said, should you have just done it last season? If only 5 games that, while disappointing, were not terrible, as you said, they're 2-3.
They won games. Yeah.
They won 2 games, one of their most signature wins of the past maybe decade. Like it hasn't been a total disaster. So if this was enough for you to make that move, should you have just done it after last season when like I was calling for it? And my justification was that like, yes, Zach Wilson played the whole season, didn't have the quarterback, various personnel issues. It still felt like they had the same issues from 2022. And it still felt like there were, independent of the talent on the field, just in terms of game planning, philosophy, mentality, it didn't feel any different and it didn't feel championship caliber. And then now 5 games into this season, those things have continued. And despite the increase in talent, you're getting similar results. But, could this have been foreseen back in January and allow the Jets to make a change and have a whole offseason to install a new mentality? Maybe, but it's all water under the bridge at this point. So we got to see now if, this one change in the middle of the season is enough to overturn all those things that I just said that were holding the team back from being championship caliber.
Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate Woody's idea that the team was going nowhere if the status quo remained, because I feel like you thought that, I thought that. Like, I feel like that was probably common. I am excited to not have like the same 3 platitudes stated at the podium after every game of, we're still taking time to gel. The cadence isn't a problem. We didn't need to take that time out. The penalties are bad. We'll get them fixed. And you come out and you get penalized 1,000 times the next week. Like, I'm very happy that maybe Jeff Ulbrich won't reuse the same lines every week, but I don't know. I'm legitimately stunned. I definitely don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I do think that it is. I don't know, and I'm interested to get your take on this. Like, do you think this is how a normal organization operates? It's like I don't know if it is or isn't. My initial reaction would be if you were only giving him 5 disappointing but not downright awful games to begin with, then you should have just fired him in February.
Yeah, I mean, it does call that into question, but I would say the counter to claiming that this is not how a normal organization operates is that Woody generally has been patient. Like that is one of the main aspects of this story is in why it's so shocking is that it's not something Woody Johnson has done. Like I remember a couple of weeks ago looking back and seeing when the last time they'd done it, and the Jets haven't had multiple coaches, even preceding Woody Johnson. They haven't had multiple coaches in a season since 1976. It's not something that he's done. It's not something this franchise has done. And that's something they've usually been praised for. Like, oh, don't fire the coach in season. Just let it play out. You're not going to build good graces within the league if you do that. You need to be professional, but that hasn't gotten the Jets very far. And I'm not saying firing Adam Gase in 2020 would have saved that season, or firing Bowles in 2018 saves that season. But this is a season that can be saved, and, to a degree in which it's not just saved, but results in great things. And it's still early enough to where, you have plenty of room to turn around what's happened so far. So it doesn't feel like how a normal organization operates. And I think there are a lot of legitimate concerns there. Like, how much power does Aaron Rodgers have? We already knew that he had plenty with his influence on Hackett being with the team, multiple players on the roster, including potentially another one, hopefully within the next few hours, next few days, could see another former Rodgers teammate. So we've already seen that.
What a day this would be.
Yeah, I mean, what a day it would be if that were to happen. I'm hoping it does, but again, like, it does call question to how much power Rodgers does have, especially now that he's potentially having a hand in firing the head coach, especially at a time where his play hasn't exactly been great recently.
So we have, in the last couple minutes, as I'm scrolling Twitter, well, just seeing what comes up, because it feels like there's a new tweet every 5 minutes. Jamie at Sherwood is not happy. Got a tweet out there with a couple angry emojis. And Jay Glazer, quote, just talked to Robert Saleh, who said he was blindsided by Woody Johnson walking into his office and letting him go. Certainly disappointed he was not going to be given the opportunity to get things going with what he said is a very good roster, end quote. I really do wonder what happened within the last 24 hours. I need to.
That interaction had to be wild. It doesn't seem like there was any build up to it. It truly seems like Woody Johnson just woke up this morning, sort of like Baker Mayfield, feeling dangerous, and just walked into Saleh's office and said, "You're out of here." It truly feels that way.
And now we're doing a bunch of people are saying that, Woody didn't hire Robert Saleh, Chris hired Saleh, which I guess is technically true, but we're getting it from all angles today on the copium, I guess. I really I don't think it is objectively a bad thing. I think this was happening at the end of the year anyway. So this is not a bad runway now to see if Ulbrich can give you anything extra. I do question the timing, the leash for 2024, and how we got to this point, because it came so far out of left field that it feels almost completely random. And I don't think that's the way even a disappointing team should be operating at this point in the season.
Yeah, and that is a fair way to look at it, because nothing about this feels normal in terms of the suddenness of it, the, like I said, impact that the quarterback may be having on it. There's a lot about this that doesn't feel like it's going to work out in the end, just in the sense that it doesn't feel like a smooth operation. But at the same time, I just feel like, despite all of that, not that it's a move that had to be made, because I didn't even think they were going to do it. I don't think anyone did, but it didn't feel like this was going to fix itself. It was very difficult to see how this was going to get better. Even if they were to get Devontae Adams and keep Saleh, there were legitimate questions of what that would do. It does feel like, as out of left field as this is, it is probably the best thing they could have done to try and, save this sinking ship and see if they could get the most out of whatever is left of this team. So that's where the mixed feelings come from for me, is between what you said and how this is very much not normal organization, operation, and how it also, I think, gives them a chance to really spark this team and find a way to get the most out of the talent they have. So, purely on paper, on field, subtract Saleh, put Ulbrich into interim head coach. I think that improves their ceiling tremendously. We'll see if they fulfill that. But from a more overarching standpoint of what it says about, what's going on in that building, it's not a very positive thing in that way.
No, it's not at all. And I definitely, I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see how they react here. Now we have Jordan Schultz. Robert Saleh's relationship with Aaron Rodgers was not fractured, despite the speculation. They were getting along. The firing was carried out solely by Woody Johnson this morning. So take that for whatever it's worth. It's probably worth nothing. But I'm really surprised. You want to talk Minnesota here for a couple minutes while we're at it?
Yeah.
Bad stuff. Borderline across the board. The run game did not get going again. Rodgers 3 interceptions. Lazard, a couple key drops, dropped a touchdown, dropped a deep pass that literally went off of his face. Just a bad game all around that the Jets did have a chance to win and were driving to win late before a Stephon Gilmore interception sealed the deal. I think we did a good job, honestly, previewing the game because Sam Darnold did not play well at all. Gave the Jets plenty of opportunities, some of which they took advantage of, some of which they did not. So Gardner dropping an interception in the end zone. The Jets not converting a 4th and 1 in field goal range by running the same play twice in a row. A lot of bad. I know it's been a little while now, and we were down in the dumps about it for 2 days, but your takeaways from the Minnesota game?
I just feel like there's a lot of the same issues that we've seen recurring. But, I mean, on the topic of this podcast, I do feel like it reflected a lot on coaching. And look, I get that there were a lot of individual mistakes. There were passes dropped, blocks missed, 3 terrible interceptions by Aaron Rodgers that you just can't throw. And we have to be objective. If Zach Wilson threw those, we would be shredding him, and Aaron Rodgers should be shredded the same way. So there were a lot of individual player mistakes, but I just feel like when you have so many players underperforming at the same time, to me, it reflects back on the coaching, because it's just difficult to believe that so many players at the same time can just start underperforming simultaneously when, as recently as last year, most of the players on this offense were playing better than they are right now. Outside of, I don't think anyone, maybe Tittman has improved a little bit year 2, although even he's had some up and down, but outside of, Braylon Allen's a rookie, but outside of that, I mean, I don't know who you point at and say this player is playing better than they were last season, or even equally to where they were in their most recent season. So when all that is happening simultaneously, I know you could, isolate particular plays. This pass was dropped, this throw wasn't good, and you could say if those plays were made, the Jets win the game. But when all that is going on simultaneously, it reflects back to me on the overall game plan, culture, scheme, and how that's not putting players in the position to be the best that they could be. So seeing all that and leading into this, I think it does give some more justification to the move, and hopefully, creating a better environment for players to be the best that they can be. But yeah, I mean, the defense deserves credit for a legitimately great performance. I know it's, tiring to talk about that every week, but, you have to give the credit where it's due. This was their best game of the season, I think, just considering the opponent, because the Vikings were like, we were thinking about how they were going to do this going to the game, and they stopped the run. And yes, Aaron Jones went out, but it's still a really good offensive line. It was their best run stopping game of the season. The coverage was, aside from some penalties, some of which were dubious, fantastic. I mean, they were spamming the ball to Justin Jefferson, and it, didn't result in his most efficient game. Darnold looked like Sam Darnold of old for the only time this season. Yeah. So phenomenal defensive game. I think you really like the way the defense has rebounded from a tough season opener, and overall through 5 games, this is, considering Jermaine Johnson isn't there, Hassan Reddick isn't there, the numbers they have through 5 games, I mean, 2nd in yards per game, 5th in scoring, 6th in EPA per play. This is, as much as you could hope for. It's a broken record. You just got to start scoring points and making it count.
Scoring points, making it count, those would be good things. I am.
They would be.
Very intrigued to see what happens with Devontae Adams now. I as we said, like, it would be a great move, and I think the tough Lazard game kind of exemplified that, in that, those passes go to Devontae Adams instead of Alan Lazard. Like, what happens? And I almost think today's news makes the Devontae thing even more, like, desperate. Like, you're going all in to save this season to the point where you're firing the coach after 5 games. Like, you're giving up a second-round pick for Devontae Adams, right? You would think those two go hand in hand.
I think so. I'm on board with it.
So I feel like that might become more pressing today. I thought Will McDonald looked good against Minnesota again. I thought Leonard Taylor looked really good against Minnesota. Quidden, disappointing. Really not a great Quidden game again, which is something that we have to keep our eyes on. But Braylon Allen didn't even really get going. I'm sure Garrett Wilson fantasy owners were happy that with the career high in targets, because that was interesting. But there's not a lot to talk about with the Minnesota game at this point. It's not a fun one to rewatch. But final thoughts from you on a stunning day in Jets history. I think that's fair to say at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic. This has rejuvenated some optimism for me. I've been scrolling through the timeline throughout this podcast, which is always a very healthy thing to do. It's great for your well-being, just your overall mental health. Fantastic, recommended for everyone. But yeah, I've been scrolling through it, and there are varying opinions. I mean, some people don't think it does anything, that it's a lateral swap, which it very well could be. The Jets might not change at all. They might be worse. We don't know. We're going to have to see it all play out. But it does feel like a situation where it's worth the shot, because, look, if they didn't do anything and they continue to have the same results, it would be frustrating that they didn't do anything about it. But at least now, if it continues, at least they tried. I guess that's the very least you could say. But I do feel like it is going to be a positive change for the reasons I mentioned earlier. I just think, and yes, Hackett's still here, Carter's still here, but the whole offense trickles down from the head coach, especially when it's, it was a head coach in Saleh who was more of a CEO type, was not committed to either side of the ball. So based on the success Ulbrich has had defensively and what we've seen from him in press conferences, on Hard Knocks, I like the energy he brings to the position. It feels like his mentality could bring a shift that the Jets needed. And, hopefully he could have a trickle-down effect on the offense that sparks some changes. But at the same time, I do think it would have been nice to get rid of Keith Carter as well. Now, I don't expect a full-scale sweep in the middle of the season, so I'm not going to say Hackett. But Carter, at the very least, would have been nice. But, there are questions about, does Rodgers have too much power, especially when, what are the optics of that when he's not playing well right now? Those are legitimate questions. So it's a lot to process. And I'm curious to see what the product looks like on Monday night in the throwbacks against the Buffalo Bills for first place, potentially with a new wide receiver who you may have heard of. We'll see how that pans out. So it's one of the more pivotal days in the history of this franchise for sure. But it has me feeling optimistic, I would say.
Teams just got to play better. And whether that was Saleh's fault or not is not up for debate at this point, because that's over and done with. If Ulbrich can rally the troops, especially offensively, and can make the run game finally get going, can make Rodgers get on the same page as not only Garrett Wilson, but all of the wide receivers at this point, and maybe tone down the penalties across the board on both sides, I feel like it's not going to be a bad thing. But I do have to question the way this was went about organizationally. It feels kind of like an impulse decision, and that's you notice how like good organizations never really tend to do things like this, which is why this scares me a little bit. I have to be honest.
The only thing quickly is sometimes I wonder how many truly good organizations
that is true
are
too.
there. Like Baltimore is great. Who else outside? Like, is Kansas City a great organization, or do they just have Patrick Mahomes. I don't know. So sometimes I do wonder
That
how
is
many
true.
teams truly set. I mean, New England doesn't look too great after Tom Brady, and they had various, dubious things that they did throughout their
That is true. And
tenure success. So I don't
the
know.
Packers did fire Mike McCarthy midway through
Yeah.
the year. So this has happened to Aaron Rodgers before, at least. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting rest of the week. It's going to be an interesting game on Monday night. We'll be back later this week to preview all that. But for now, Robert Saleh out, head coach of the New York Jets. Emergency podcast reaction here for you. So keep it locked. Jets X Factor, I'm sure, is going to have a ton of content today and in the coming days, kind of reacting to the fallout from this. But we'll see what Joe Douglas decides to do about Devontae Adams, and we'll catch you later this week.